The weary, battle-hardened soldiers of the 10th Rifle Regiment emerged from the torn and splintered hedgerows that morning, clutching a sidearm that had become an object of mockery among European military circles. German defenders, confident in their technological superiority, had derisively nicknamed the American pistol the shot hammer or Schuss hammer. To them, it appeared as a cumbersome, antiquated relic, utterly ill-suited for the high-velocity, rapid maneuver warfare that defined the modern European battlefield. This initial ridicule, born of a fundamental misunderstanding of its design philosophy, would soon be replaced by a term spoken with a mixture of terror and awe. Der Schocker, the shocker. This seemingly obsolete piece of personal armament, the Colt M1911 pistol, fired a heavy, slow-moving slug capable of inflicting a psychological and physical catastrophe for which no German defensive doctrine had ever accounted. It was a weapon that did not merely wound. It delivered a final, absolute verdict. The Allied advance through the sector designated Operation Anchor had been stymied for weeks by seasoned German armored infantry divisions. These defenders, veterans of the brutal Eastern Front, had honed a defensive doctrine built upon two unshakable pillars: the superior long-range ballistics of their rifle cartridges and an unwavering belief in the power of rapid, suppressive fire. Their primary infantry rifle, the Carabiner 98K, fired a lighter, faster round that delivered devastating energy transfer at extended ranges. Their iconic submachine guns, like the MP40, were designed to saturate an area with a high volume of bullets, prioritizing fire density over the individual stopping power of each round. The consensus within the German High Command was a matter of ballistic dogma. Volume of fire and high velocity would always triumph over raw mass and momentum. This doctrine profoundly influenced their choice of secondary armaments. German officers and non-commissioned officers overwhelmingly favored the sleek, modern P-38 and the iconic Luger P-08, both chambered in the 9.19mm Parabellum cartridge. This round offered significant tactical advantages: low recoil for faster follow-up shots, higher magazine capacity, and excellent accuracy. The underlying theory, rigorously taught at German infantry schools, was strategically cold-blooded. A wounded enemy soldier became a logistical and moral burden on the attacking force, often requiring more resources to care for than a dead one. Consequently, their sidearms were engineered to wound, harass, and suppress, to break the enemy's momentum through a cascade of injuries. They openly scoffed at the American military's stubborn commitment to the heavy, slow .45 caliber round, viewing it as an anachronism, a throwback to a primitive frontier mentality that had no place in a sophisticated industrial war. The specific tactical challenge confronting the 10th Regiment was the breaching of the heavily fortified German line surrounding the ancient mill at Montjaskar. The German forces in this sector, commanded by the capable and confident Albert Lieutenant Reinhold Foch, had constructed a formidable defensive network. They were dug into deep, reinforced concrete emplacements with meticulously planned interlocking fields of fire that covered every conceivable approach. Foch's troops were protected not just by earth and concrete, but by an absolute, unshakable confidence in the superiority of their defensive firepower. Their infantry was trained to understand that if an American soldier managed to close the distance, their high-capacity pistols and fast-cycling machine pistols would deliver a paralyzing hail of bullets, overwhelming any attacker. This confidence was rooted in a specific ballistic belief. The American .45 caliber round would likely pass cleanly through a soldier's body, or at most through a thick winter coat and webbing, without delivering the instantaneous, fight-ending hydrostatic shock necessary to halt a determined assault in its tracks. Foch had even formalized this confidence in his Defense Order No. 3, which explicitly stated, "Do not fear close combat. Allow the Americans to close to within 10 meters, then unleash the full volume of our fire. Their oversized pistol is slow to fire and requires 2 hits to stop a determined man. We will deliver 10. The cold mathematics of close-range defense had been meticulously calculated. However, Foch and the German High Command had failed to account for the one ballistic variable the M1911 was specifically engineered to deliver, a hydrostatic shock and terminal momentum so overwhelming it could defy a soldier's training, equipment, and sheer force of will. They had calculated for volume, but they had fatally disregarded the potential of the single, absolute stop. The weapon that would irrevocably shatter Foch's doctrine was not a product of recent wartime desperation. Its genesis lay 4 decades earlier, in the brutal, close-quarters jungle fighting of the Philippine-American War. On the island of Samar, U.S. troops had faced ferocious, often morally emboldened resistance from native warriors who, in numerous documented accounts, shrugged off multiple hits from the standard-issue .38 caliber revolvers. A military committee, led by the insightful Colonel John T. Thompson and the brilliant firearms designer John M. Browning, analyzed these failures and reached a revolutionary conclusion. In a life-or-death struggle at spitting distance, guaranteed stopping power was infinitely more valuable than target-shooting precision. The solution was the adoption of a new, powerful automatic pistol, a design perfected by Browning's genius. Its technical designation was straightforward: pistol, caliber, .45, automatic, M1911. Its purpose was singular and uncompromising: to achieve absolute instantaneous incapacitation of a hostile target. The core innovation of the weapon was the cartridge itself. The .45 ACP automatic Colt pistol round was a ballistic marvel in its simplicity. It propelled a massive, blunt-nosed projectile, typically weighing 230 grains, at a comparatively slow velocity of approximately 850 feet per second. This stood in radical contrast to the German 9mm round, which was significantly faster and lighter. The physics of the .45 ACP were meticulously documented in pre-war U.S. Ordnance Department records. Its devastating effectiveness stemmed from 2 critical principles that German ballistic experts had completely overlooked. First was the principle of terminal cross-sectional area. The .45 caliber slug had a diameter of nearly half an inch, making it almost 50% wider than the 9mm bullet. Upon striking a target, this large surface area crushed and destroyed a far greater volume of tissue, muscle, and bone, creating a much wider and more devastating permanent wound channel. It was the difference between being poked with a sharp ice pick and being struck with a blunt hammer. Second, and far more crucial for close combat, was the principle of momentum transfer and hydrostatic shock. While the high-velocity 9mm round possessed greater kinetic energy on paper, the heavy .45 slug carried significantly higher momentum. Upon impact, the large, slow-moving .45 projectile was designed to expend almost all of its immense kinetic energy directly inside the target's body, rather than passing through it. Observers during initial testing at places like the Fort Riley proving grounds discovered that the .45 slug delivered a massive, non-penetrating shock wave, a hydrostatic shock, directly to the central nervous system. This shock wave, traveling through the body's fluid-filled tissues, often caused instant physical collapse and unconsciousness, even when vital organs were not directly struck. The projectile did not need to be fast to be effective. It needed to be heavy and blunt, acting as a kinetic sledgehammer. Initial tests demonstrated that the .45 ACP round could reliably and instantly stop a charging target, whether man or beast, with a single, well-placed hit to the torso, a feat the 9mm cartridge could not consistently replicate. The pistol's recoil-operated mechanism and its limited 7-round magazine capacity were not oversights. They were a calculated compromise. The design sacrificed magazine depth and rapid-fire capability for the sake of delivering terminal ballistic effect of the highest order. The M1911 was not a weapon designed for prolonged firefights. It was a tool engineered for that specific, desperate moment when a soldier, having exhausted his primary ammunition, found himself face-to-face with an enemy that had to be stopped, immediately and definitively. It was a weapon built not for the abstract theories of warfighting doctrine, but for the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of survival. The German calculation that it would take 2 9mm hits to stop a determined man was about to collide with the American reality of one .45 caliber shot, resulting in the absolute cessation of the threat. The moment of truth arrived in the oppressive darkness of a pre-dawn assault on June 16, 1944. The American forces, having used satchel charges to blast a narrow, precarious entry point in the German perimeter, were immediately swallowed by the maelstrom of defensive fire. The battle instantly devolved into a desperate, chaotic melee in the narrow, constricting trenches and shadowy concrete bunkers of Montjaskar. This was the environment the German defenders had trained for, but it was also the arena for which the M1911 had been specifically designed. Corporal Elias Vance, a point man from the 10th Regiment, found himself isolated in a cramped, dark corridor, face-to-face with 2 German Sturmtruppen who were charging him, their MP-40s now empty, relying on the swift deployment and rapid fire of their P-38 pistols. Standard assault doctrine would have required Vance to desperately evade the initial incoming 9mm rounds and attempt to bring his M1 Garand rifle to bear, a near impossible feat in the confined space. Instead, acting on instinct and training, Vance drew his M1911. According to the after-action report later filed by Lieutenant David Stern, the entire violent engagement lasted no more than 4 seconds. Vance fired 3 deliberate shots. The first German soldier, struck squarely in the center of his chest, did not stagger, cry out, or even slow his charge. He simply ceased all movement mid-stride, his body's momentum carrying him forward into a lifeless, crumpled heap on the trench floor. The second soldier, hit in the side, was thrown violently sideways as if struck by an invisible force, his body slamming against the cold concrete of the bunker wall, his pistol clattering from his instantly limp hand. The sudden, absolute cessation of the threat was immediate and terrifyingly silent. If the Japanese defenders on Iwo Jima were incinerated by flamethrowers, the Germans at Montjaskar were, from the perspective of their comrades, simply and inexplicably switched off. Allied signals intelligence teams, intercepting and decoding German radio traffic, documented the defenders' immediate and baffled reaction. The psychological impact of the M1911's performance began to exceed its physical destructiveness. German soldiers, mentally conditioned to believe they could absorb a pistol wound and continue fighting long enough for their comrades to win the engagement, were wholly unprepared for the instantaneous, total physical negation delivered by the .45 caliber round. It was a fundamental violation of everything they understood about military physics and human endurance. They named it Der Schocker because the sight of a determined, charging soldier simply collapsing into a lifeless state from a single, low-velocity thump was profoundly disorienting and shocking. This sudden, violent proof that their body armor, their rigorous training, and their iron will could be instantly and utterly bypassed by a single shot from a ridiculed pistol led to a rapid and catastrophic collapse of morale in the close-quarter combat zones. Soldiers began to abandon their fortified positions at the mere sight of an American soldier holding the large pistol, unwilling to face its final verdict. The German tactical calculation of wound versus kill had been decisively, brutally countered by the American principle of stop versus wound. The successful breach at Montjaskar provided a brutal but invaluable lesson, allowing American forces to rapidly refine and formalize new assault tactics that deliberately leveraged the M1911's unique psychological impact. Records from the 1st Assault Battalion documented immediate battlefield modifications. Initial problems, such as the slow cycling of the heavy slide in the muddy, grime-filled conditions and the limited 7-round capacity, were addressed with practical solutions like applying specialized graphite lubricants and prioritizing flanking maneuvers to force engagements into the extreme close quarters where the M1911 reigned supreme. The new doctrine, formally documented in Field Order 7-44, was strategically simple yet revolutionary. Force the decision range. Standard infantry elements would continue to suppress German positions at a distance with rifle and machine gun fire. Meanwhile, Specialized breacher teams, composed of officers, NCOs, and experienced point men heavily armed with M1911s and extra magazines, would intentionally and aggressively close the distance to within 10 meters, or even point-blank range. At this intimate distance, the high velocity and flat trajectory of the German 9mm round were largely wasted, while the instantaneous, fight-ending stopping power of the .45 caliber became the single decisive factor in the engagement. This was a complete and total reversal of pre-war infantry doctrine, which had always favored maintaining distance from the enemy. The successful application of the M1911 was not merely a victory of ballistics and tactics. It was a stunning demonstration of American industrial capacity and logistical prowess. The sheer volume of .45 ACP ammunition required to sustain these intensive close-quarters operations far exceeded all initial pre-invasion estimates. The entire logistical chain, masterfully orchestrated by the U.S. Ordnance Corps and the Transportation Command, had to adapt with incredible speed and efficiency. The manufacturing process for the heavy 230-grain .45 slug was fundamentally different from the high-volume, high-speed production lines for standard .30 caliber rifle rounds. The .45 ACP required a high-quality, dense-lid core and a precisely formed brass casing to guarantee the massive momentum transfer upon impact that made it so effective. The Remington Peters ammunition plant in Delaware was designated as a primary source and underwent a miraculous transformation, rapidly escalating its production output from hundreds of thousands of rounds per month to over 1 million rounds per month by April of 1944. This explosive increase in production necessitated the creation of a specialized, priority supply infrastructure. Wooden ammunition crates, boldly stenciled with special pistol caliber .45, were given high priority status for shipment. Their transportation involved specially designated convoy trucks, and at the front lines, dedicated ammunition supply points, ASPs, were established specifically to receive, store, and distribute the heavy pistol rounds alongside the standard rifle and machine gun ammunition. The 64th Ordnance Depot Company was tasked with this critical forward supply mission, ensuring that the breacher teams and NCOs never ran low on the essential tool required to deliver their verdict. The German war machine possessed no comparable logistical resilience or flexibility. While German factories could produce millions of 9mm rounds, the entire industrial and design base required to pivot towards the development and mass production of a high-momentum, heavy-caliber pistol round, or a weapon to fire it, was utterly non-existent. Their manufacturing capabilities were already stretched to the breaking point, focused on producing tanks, artillery shells, and aircraft. The very concept of designing, testing, tooling, and fielding a new heavy-caliber personal sidearm in response to a tactical crisis was completely beyond their crippled industrial capacity. Marine Corps records from the peak of the St. Laurent campaign show that field units were consuming up to 10,000 rounds of .45 ACP daily. The American ability to meet this staggering demand, ensuring the weapon was always available for that critical moment of close combat, demonstrated an industrial might that the Germans could not hope to match. The American victory was, in part, forged on the assembly lines that could reliably deliver a 230-grain projectile to the forwardmost trench, allowing the M1911 to become an undeniable symbol of industrial superiority. While the M1911 undoubtedly saved thousands of American lives by enabling the rapid, low-casualty reduction of fortifications, its unique and intimate lethality also created profound moral and ethical challenges, carefully documented in military chaplain reports. The weapon was a tool of immediate, personal destruction, often used at arm's length. Unlike an artillery barrage or a rifle shot taken at 100 yards, using the M1911 forced the operator to be a direct, close-up witness to the instantaneous and devastating effect of the .45 caliber round. Chaplains reported a marked increase in requests for counseling and spiritual solace from the breacher teams compared to other infantry units. The M1911 was effective precisely because it violated the natural human expectation of resilience. It delivered a fatal, final judgment without struggle, warning, or the possibility of a lingering fight. Veterans Administration studies conducted after the war found that the psychological burden of employing the M1911 in close quarters led to higher rates of combat stress symptoms, specifically related to the intimate, undeniable knowledge of delivering finality. If Japanese flame tank crews were haunted by the memory of incineration, the M1911 operators were marked by the memory of absolute physical cessation. This duality, a salvation for the overall force, a horror for the individual operator, would forever define its complex legacy. As one veteran confided to a chaplain, "It was necessary, absolutely necessary. But seeing a man just drop like a puppet whose strings are cut right in front of you, it stays with you. We didn't wound them. We erased them." The final days of the Monjaskar sector were characterized by the total collapse of German defensive morale. The final assessment, derived from captured documents and post-war interrogations, overwhelmingly confirmed the psychological effectiveness of the American pistol. The most powerful testimony came from the few German officers who survived the close quarters engagements. Hauptmann Anton Kessler, captured during the clearing of a final bunker, provided a chilling summary to Allied interrogators. "We were told the American pistol was a relic. We were trained to expect fire that wounded. But when the American stood at 3 meters and fired his pistol, it was not a wound. It was total cessation. The body absorbed the full strike and simply ceased to function. It was a technology designed for finality, not for a war of attrition. We had no defense for that." Kessler's words encapsulated the core of the German terror. Their soldiers were not merely afraid of dying. They were terrified of being rendered instantly and completely powerless, a fate that directly contradicted their entire warrior ethos. The sight of a determined comrade in mid-charge simply falling dead from a single, low-velocity round shattered the foundational belief that courage and willpower could overcome physics. The 8-week battle for the Monjaskar sector ended on March the 17th. Of the approximately 1,200 German defenders under Albert Lieutenant Foch, roughly 700 died. Crucially, the 500 soldiers who surrendered represented an unprecedented capitulation rate for German forces in a heavily fortified position. American forces suffered 218 killed and 415 wounded. Without the M1911's unique ability to neutralize close-quarters strongpoints and shatter enemy morale, command estimates conservatively placed American casualties at being twice as high. The transformation was complete. The German faith in high-velocity, low-mass ballistics had been replaced by a grim recognition that American technological pragmatism, embodied by the slow, heavy .45 slug, could negate any positional advantage and break any soldier's spirit. The M1911 demonstrated that, in the cold arithmetic of modern industrial warfare, superior industrial capacity, when multiplied by a ruthless dedication to practical ballistic effectiveness, equals victory, regardless of the traditional courage displayed by the other side. The initial laughter of the German troops was the final sound before they encountered the verdict. The quiet, dull thump of the M1911 firing in the trenches of Monjaskar was the sound of German certainty dissolving into chaos and defeat.